Good morning, everybody. I want to bring you into our hillbilly version of a seed starting operation. We tend to operate with as little fiat as possible because we want to spend as little time as possible obtaining it. As Gabby and I really switched to homesteading for a living, we are seeking to spend as little time chasing down those devaluing fiat dollars as quickly as possible. And so that means oftentimes improvising solutions to things, trying to find ways to do things that don't mean buying stuff so much. And seed starting is a really good example of that because there are a million ways to do it, and if you go on the internet and you're not familiar with starting seeds and you're trying it for the first time, it's very common to get overwhelmed with the information out there because just like gardening, you'll find there's a lot of content creators who are out there with very specific methods. You know, you need to buy X ratio, you have to have exactly this much perlite and this much potting soil and this much coconut coir, or you need to buy a heating pad, you need to have lights, you need to do this or that. While there's a lot of helpful information in that and trying to do things on a mass production scale, it can be very important to find a method and follow it. But I've always been bad at finding methods and following them. I kind of like to just figure out things as I go and find a way that works with the resources I have. And so I wanted to show you our seed starting operation because we are doing things on a pretty decent scale. We're not just growing seeds for our own purpose, we're also growing them for our market garden, and we're actually trying to sell some seedlings as well. And we're doing it without heating pads. The only lights we have are 3 of those little Walmart ones that I bought years ago. And then we just have a couple of very small south-facing windows. And that's what we're working with. We have a greenhouse outdoors, but it's just too cold right now for seed starting out there. And that's okay because there's a lot of ways to kind of finesse this and finagle this, and this will help people out who are either on a budget or just trying to reduce their consumption. So really, instead of thinking about all of the instructions you might find on the internet or in books, really what we need to think about is what do these plants want? And what they want generally is a really high temperature to germinate in. And then what they want is they really want to stay at the right level of moistness. And that's very difficult because they tend to dry out in those little cells. They suck up all the water really quickly. And then you have to add that water really quickly, but it's hard not, you can easily overwater too. So watering is really delicate. And so what we want is a soil that holds water and sponges it up. Typically that's what you find in good potting soil and don't find in bad potting soil. So let's take you through the process because the different parts of our seed starting are staged throughout the house right now. We can't get them into the greenhouse, and we're heating this house with wood heat. And we're also still in the middle of the build, so pardon the mess because we still don't even have all our insulation up. So this house is not evenly heated. It's pretty warm right here. It's pretty cool in there, and that means that affects how we do our seed starting pretty drastically. So again, don't mind the mess. We're still moving things in and out, and this is also kind of a potting shed and a house at the same time. So that first step is germination, and a lot of stuff needs a really high temperature to germinate at. It can be 75, 85 degrees. That's really hot, and we don't have anywhere that hot, and I don't have a heating pad. So instead, all I'm doing is placing them right as close as I can to the heat source here. This guy is definitely getting warm enough for them to germinate. And so their first phase of their life is over here. Looks like we've already got a few guys starting. Thank you for your help, Holly. We've got a few popping up right there. And so we keep the plastic over them. Now, when they're close to a heat source like this, they dry out really quickly. So we have to tend to these the most. We're watering them constantly. Here's another one we just put out just yesterday. That'll be germinating probably within a few days there. So we let those go until they germinate. Now you'll notice there's really no light except what's coming from this window and the overhead lights, just the normal house lights. So it's really not enough light for them. But most seedlings don't need light just to get up. Some do, but a lot of them, they just need heat, and then they get up, and then they need light right away. So like this one, we just saw that there's a couple seedlings popping up now. We'll move them away from this heat to this next spot, which is still pretty warm over here, but it's not right up next to the stove. And this table gives us a good platform to put our lights on. Normally we have a bunch of lights over these. We have to keep them up here because Holly is, of course, very destructive and likes to tip things over. So this is kind of the next phase. Once they start popping up, they start getting lights put over them. And just in the interest of space, once we run out of space there, right now they're getting transferred over to this south-facing window. Now it is much colder in this room, so it's not ideal, but again, we're working with what we got. So we stage our lights here, and they're doing pretty well between the lights and the natural lighting coming from the window here. But because of the cold, things are slowing down a bit here, but that's actually to our advantage. What tends to happen is plants, the biggest struggle everyone gets with seedlings is they get leggy. They're reaching for the light, and sometimes you actually need a little bit of cold to kind of bring them back down a little bit. And it's also okay if because of the cold, if they're not growing as fast, it's okay. We're starting these things way ahead of the season. We're just trying to get as much ready to go. So the second that greenhouse is warm enough, that's where everything will go. So it's sitting out there right now with the rabbits and holding some perennials, but very soon it will start to have plants and seedlings inside of it. So all of this really didn't cost us any money. Like I said, I already had these lights from my first endeavors into gardening a few years ago, so we didn't buy anything for it, and we've staged every window. And just keep in mind, it does not need to be a south-facing window to start plants out in. South-facing windows are better, but if you're getting light, just give it a try. Soil is cheap, seeds are cheap. You can just do what you can do, and you know, failure is important too. Failure is useful. When you kill a plant, you learned a lesson. We are all in college right now as we learn to homestead, and failures are just sometimes expensive lessons, but most of the time, they're not even expensive lessons. Again, seeds are still cheap and very available, so now is the time to make lots of mistakes. So that's our operation. As you can see, we're just improvising, but it's working pretty well, and we're getting a lot of production, and we're going to have probably all of the seedlings we want and then some. And then just a couple more notes on kind of intuitively doing this. Again, the soil mixture is important because, first of all, you're cramming a plant like this into this tiny little cell. He's going to suck up every bit of water in there. And so you're going to need to really retain water, but also they're going to suck up every bit of moisture, or every bit of nutrient. So you're going to need a soil that has a lot of nutrient in it. So what I do with these is I actually put my kind of rougher compost on the bottom of these. So once they get to that size, they're sucking up some really good compost. I trust my compost. I know it's strong and it's full of good stuff, as opposed to most potting soils. However, where it kind of matters what you do buy as far as potting soil, if you're buying it, you want potting soil that's very fine like that, very crumbly. Because if you have large chunks in it, like, let's see if we can find one here. If you have large chunks like this, which a lot of the cheaper soils do, they're going to like be on top of your seed, and they're not going to allow it to come through. They're going to kill a lot of stuff. So you do want to make sure it's fine. Now, Danny from Deep South Homestead just did a video on this, I think, days ago. He has a great channel to check out, where he just built a little sifter out of a kind of a grate he found, and he sifts it down. That's a great way to do it. You can make sifters out of all sorts of things. And you can also do that with your own compost to make your own potting soil. So basically, you just want to make sure it's holding water. Now, something that does that traditionally is like people, and it's kind of fallen out of favor, but peat moss is really popular for that, and it's very fine. But in lieu of that, coconut coir works, but also just woody matter in general, that's really fine. And so making your own compost is really a good way to do it. What a lot of people do, what I'm starting to drift towards, is I make really good compost, sift it, and then I add it to just some store-bought compost that's still pretty decent. And I also water it with a compost tea mixture that I made. Just throw a bunch of compost in a barrel with water, and that helps give a lot of extra nutrients as these grow. So lots of little ways to make this work out. We also seed them really heavily. Got this idea from Cindy. She's probably watching. We seed them heavy, more than one plant per cell. And then as they get big and as that greenhouse comes online, we can transplant a lot of those little seedlings out of that cell into cups or into other cells. Especially that makes sense because we're buying a bunch more of these and we're kind of waiting on them. And so we're able to start with what we got and really get maximum production with minimum resources. So hopefully that's helpful to everyone working with a budget or just trying not to have to buy a whole bunch of stuff to start their seedlings. Remember, gardening is more common sense. It's more intuition than anything else. It's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to not have all of the right gear that they say you need on the internet. All right, everyone, hopefully that's helpful again. In the meantime, stay safe, be well, and happy homesteading.